All right. Well, in the spirit of it's the last session of the day, and we all want to get the session and do it and have a great time, but also travel home. We're going to start right on time. So I have the honor of introducing a couple of my coworkers, Rebecca and Marissa, who have so graciously offered to be here and talk about the state of Washington's public art program. So I'm going to turn it over to them, and I'll let them give better and proper introductions to themselves. But thank you all for being here and not going home early. Appreciate it.
Hi, thank you for being here at the end of the day. My name is Marissa Laubscher, and I'm a project manager with our Art in Public Places program. So I work with committees all over the state to basically select artists, commission artists, to create artwork for public facilities. And I'll pass it to Rebecca.
Can y'all hear me maybe I need to get closer, I don't know. I'm Rebecca Merkley. I'm also a project manager with ArtsWA, and I come from an education background, which comes in handy. A lot of our public art collection is in our schools, colleges, and universities. And so yeah, we're super excited to be here. And hopefully this will be kind of informal. We want it to be conversational, so please feel free to raise your hand if you have a question at any point. We'd love to clarify anything. And just so you know, most of the examples on the slides that we have are pieces from our state public collection that were created by veterans, right? And you'll see the branch of the military that they served under in the tag information. With the exception of this one slide, I missed one. So apologies to John Moylan.
So first of all, what is the Art in Public Places program? So anytime the state funds new construction, half of 1% of that construction budget is set aside for public art. So for example, we just had a veterans home in Walla Walla get built, and there was some art money set aside, so we purchased artworks to put into that facility. So we're going to share some examples with you of artwork that exists in facilities, but also artwork by veterans. But essentially, this is the vision of our program. So we're acknowledging that as a state agency, there's a lot of municipal public art programs, but as the public art program for the state, we have sort of this unique position of working in both rural communities as well as the cities. And so that really gives us a unique position to advance artists across Washington state. So the state art collection itself is in over 1,000 locations. There's over 5,000 objects. It's owned by the state of Washington, so it's owned by all of you. We're looking for artwork that will be impactful and accessible where it's placed. So all of the artworks are chosen by local community members for those communities. We just facilitate this process. And we're also looking for artworks that will last and represent diverse communities. So we're looking for permanent artwork that will last as long as the life of the building, but also reflect the communities. So one of the reasons we're here is when we do have artwork in a military facility or a veteran facility, one of the first things our committees always ask is, can we have a veteran artist? Can we have artwork by veterans? So we're here to really get the word out about this program, that it exists, because we're going to be opening up our application and asking some of you to maybe apply to be on our public artist roster so that you can be eligible for selection for some of these projects.
So this year we are celebrating our 50th anniversary, right? So again, as Marissa mentioned, it's publicly funded through legislation, and so the communities where the artwork is going aren't having to, pay extra taxes or anything to get those works of art, and it makes it so that communities all across the state can get a really beautiful range of works. This is actually the very first artwork that was commissioned by our program in 1976. And it was also created by U.S. Navy veterans. So veterans have been with our program from the very beginning. And so of course, we want to have this longevity piece, right? We want them to last, right? So this piece was from 1976. It's a steel piece. There can be complications with just natural deterioration, especially where it's outside. So we work really closely with artists to set them up for success, to set the work up for success, and to care and maintain it throughout the life of the work.
So who do we work with? So we're unique in that almost, I want to say 65% of our collection is in K through 12 schools. We have a ton of artwork here in Spokane with Spokane Public Schools. You can actually look it up by going to our website under My Public Art Portal. You can see all the artwork that is here. We also have artwork in higher education facilities, so Spokane Falls Community College. We just had a huge piece installed there. And state agencies, including buildings owned by the Department of Veteran Affairs, as well as Department of Corrections, WashDOT and their facilities. So we're in a large range of locations serving different audiences.
So this next piece is the big push on why we're here, right? We want you all to join our public artist roster. This is the main way that we select artists for these projects, right? So it's a kind of pre-screened list of artists who are available, and our committees will be able to choose from their portfolios that we have on file. With larger budgets and for special needs, then we also do open calls, right? So if you're interested in those, you can also watch for them, right? In addition to commissioning new works, we also have curated projects. So we have also a roster for curators. So if that is an interest you have, we have that as well, right? In which case the curators will have kind of a theme or a mission, and they will select artworks based on that. And we'll be working with the community to meet their needs.
All right, so what is public art? So essentially it's any artwork that's visible to the public. So even just arriving at the convention center, there's that, the metal work that's like the gate along the riverfront, that was a public art commission with the city of Spokane, with a Spokane artist. But it's any artwork that's paid for public dollars. So you'll also notice maybe there's some paintings up in the convention center. Those were also paid for by the city of Spokane's public art program. So really, it's owned by the public, and it's chosen by the public, and it's created for the public. And then we're here to facilitate and steward. But ultimately, we're looking for artwork that's going to enhance public spaces and bring meaning into space.
These are some examples. Monumental sculptures may be where a lot of folks' minds go when they hear public art, right? And this is a really great example. This is Cloud Gate. It's sometimes known as the Bean, and Ishkapur hates it when you call it that. But these typically will take years of planning, teams to create, and they're and again, like fabricated by teams. It's not just a one-person kind of effort. And these are meant to instill like civic pride and create those third places, right? Enhance parks and those kinds of things. So on the very opposite end of permanent monumental sculpture, you have temporary art installations, right? So ArtsWA does not do these, but many of the city and other sorts of organizations will fund and promote these sorts of events, right? These are often really interactive. These are really fun ways to get the community involved in art and just have cool things to do, right? And they tend to be a little bit more inexpensive. And you'll see the civic pride piece is really important in all of these examples.
And just to add to the temporary art piece, so if you are an artist who's trying to do public art for the first time, we often suggest looking to your local art organizations that do promote temporary public art, because they can be a great way to start building a portfolio, because even though they're not permanent, they're in public space. They can demonstrate a sense of scale that might help a portfolio get chosen by a committee that's looking for a public artwork. And so we're gonna also share more examples. So a lot of times there will be like a workshop or social engagement component. Not always, it really depends on the artist's practice. And so we have done a few projects where there's a community engagement component. Here's Marissa Cole. She's a Spokane artist, and she's working, I think this was out, yeah, it was in Tattoo Elementary in Richland. So she did workshops with students. She brought in some examples of some of her work, and they inspired her work. So she didn't necessarily use the student artwork in her mosaic mural, but she used the things they were interested in to allow them to be co-collaborators, which really helped instill like a sense of ownership with students. So that's also something that's possible when you're working in public.
You're going to tell us the time frame that you need to leave, and then have a year.
Traffic box wraps are another really common one that you see, especially that are promoted by cities, city arts organizations. And this is a great entry into public art, right? So if you can create a drawing, create a design on a computer, a variety of different media, that can translate into a box wrap. And typically, what this will look like is you present the design, it's selected by a committee, and then the artist is paid a fee for the rights to display them in public on these utility boxes. Right? So it's a way to make a little bit of cash and get your foot in the door with public art. Murals are probably another big go-to that folks think of when you think of public art. And it's also a very good entry point, especially for painters. These can be collaborative, right? They can be a little bit more cost-effective, right? As compared to like a giant bronze sculpture, for example. So there are lots of opportunities out there in a variety of different media.
And functional art. So these can be a little tricky. We do some of them at ArtsWA, but basically it's when you get involved in a project really early. So for example, this is like an integration into a street post. So an artist might provide a design that then a contractor takes and integrates into construction. So all of these examples are kind of just examples of entry points. If you've never done a public art commission before, where do you start? Traffic boxes are great, right? Because you can provide a file, have it produced, and then you're showing to a committee that you understand scale. Same with these, you show how your work can be translated into a permanent material. Sure, mosaics. So with ArtsWA, we only do mosaics indoors just because of the long-term maintenance concerns. They're another really great tool. Like if you do a lot of painting, you can actually work with a fabricator who can translate your painting into a mosaic, and so it's a really durable material for indoors. And working with fabricators in general is something that a lot of studio artists don't think of doing, but it's one really exceptional way to sort of scale up. So if you are a paper artist or you do a lot of line work, you can work with a metal fabricator to cut your design large scale. And if you have a budget from an agency, you can actually afford to do that. So it's a great way to sort of get your foot in the door and make that transition.
So stained glass is another example where the artwork will be kind of integrated into the building project. So these you would want to have relatively early in most cases. And these are great because they don't necessarily claim the wall space. So if they wanted to have a space for student work or a number of other sorts of things, it's still available. But then you get color and light and dimension into the space. And this is another cool place to work with fabricators. We have many in Washington who work with stained glass artists, so that's pretty exciting. So we also have freestanding sculpture. So we kind of talked about sculpture a little bit with monumental scale sculpture, and freestanding sculpture is kind of in that same category. These are often also created with fabricators or by artists, depending on what facilities they have available. These we typically see outdoors, but not only, and we definitely want to see them made out of durable materials. Right? These are not temporary installations. This is one that I worked on. This is the Women Veterans of Idaho Memorial. I was an assistant designer and a fabrication lead on this one. So if I had to really simplify the process, my colleague and friend, Crystal Coker, designed it, and I made it, right? So that's, again, a simplification. We had a team, but pass this one to you.
And I think the relationship that Rebecca just described is kind of a good demonstration. Like these larger public projects, you have a team. You usually work with a team. So the artist is lending the vision, the design, but you might find somebody who can create a mold for you and cast something in bronze, and maybe you've never done that before. There are people who will work with you. Also engineers, right? So you're not on your own. So we're gonna move into examples. This was in the Walla Walla Veterans Home, so fairly recent. And so this is a residential facility for elder care. There's also a memory care facility within the facility. And this is sort of the central courtyard. And so we did do existing purchases for this. So we hired a curator, Kathleen Moles, and she selected artwork that really kind of blended a sense of calm, there's almost a resort feel to this facility because of where it's positioned in Walla Walla with the views of the Blue Mountains. And so she brought in some artworks by veterans. She also brought in a lot of artworks from the region. So James Lavador, this is an artwork by Jan Hoy, really to create, just sort of elevate that space to make it feel like a home, like not so institutional. So that's where artwork can really work magic to bring meaning to space.
This is an example that is in a military connected space. This is at the Yakima National Guard Armory and Readiness Center. And you can see that it's got multiple pieces, right? And so depending on the budget and the vision that the artist develops with the committee, you might have multiple pieces, and there might be a lively discussion about the content and what the message should be, right? So this is obviously dealing with historical events. I'll take this one. Okay. So this is a freestanding sculpture. It is bronze. It's another one of our older pieces. It was originally commissioned for a different public school, but it needed to be resited with new construction and things, and so this is now at the Washington Youth Academy in Bremerton. And Jack Archibald stained glass. Yeah.
So this was for a military readiness center, and so Jack Archibald, he gets chosen for these facilities a lot. He works in an abstract way, but it still is able to convey meaning to the people who are using the facility. So he was given instructions about movement. I think their logo was the running man, and we didn't want to do a literal interpretation of a running man, but he came in, this building was already built, he does his stained glass panels and they get inset into the storefront, and it was really just to capture that sense of movement and bring some color into that space that was a very active space.
So we also, with curated collections, then we also get great examples of photography. We also have some photographers on the public arts roster, I believe. So there are a number of ways, if you're a photographer, you can still be out here making cool public art. And I just really love this piece. It's really fun to me. I don't know if y'all can see, but this, it's called Self-Portrait with Astronaut, and there's the artist crouching down in this very odd position to take the picture of himself in the reflection of the astronaut's visor. And so this is another one that's at the Washington Youth Academy. So it's whimsical and fun for the students.
So this project is for the Spokane Readiness Center by Yancy Wright, and you can see how the artist took actual imagery from military personnel, military equipment, and then translated it in such a way that would create meaning and pride for the people who use the facility. So this is another piece that was part of the DVA, the Walla Walla Veterans Facility, and this is James Lavador, who I think is a veteran, and that's why she chose his work, perhaps. But it gives you an example of the interior, sort of how the colors brought in, but also it's a landscape, so it's really calming.
If he is a veteran, I apologize. I wanted to make sure I acknowledged everybody.
Maybe he's not. He might not be. I stand corrected.
But yeah, if not, So this is an example of an outdoor mosaic mural, which we don't typically do. And this one is at the Washington Veterans Home, Redsill. And I wish I knew more about the story of this one. Do you know this one?
So Mike Mandel, what he usually does is he'll work with existing imagery and real people. So this is probably an actual veteran, and I bet you there's a story that goes along with that photo, and he'll get rights to reproduce them. So these are mosaics, but they're photorealistic quality because each tile becomes a pixel. And so the imagery can range from widely abstract, like what you saw with Jack Archibald, to very literal depictions of what service looks like. So this is an artwork by a veteran, David Eisenhower. And so this is for an elementary school. So this was Acosta Elementary in Westport over on the coast. And he spent time combing the beaches and finding these little, they're not fossils, but these artifacts. And then he blew them up, magnified them, and then cast them in bronze. And I did have a conversation with David about how his service as a veteran influenced his public art practice, and he says it does. It influences him every day because of his experience of the world when he traveled. He's always gaining from those experiences and translating it into his artwork.
As we kind of talked about, there are a variety of different types of public art programs, right? So ranging from local, like the city art organizations. There are also larger regional arts organizations like For Culture, etc. And we have a few that are starting up out here in Eastern Washington. And then ArtsWA, of course, is statewide. And then we also have others that cover the whole Pacific Northwest. RACC is a great one. There are also others out of Oregon and Boise that have eligibility for artists kind of all over the Pacific Northwest.
And then if you're pregnancy-related disability.
And I'll say if you're in Spokane, Spokane Arts is the main one here that does the public art commissions.
Thank you.
So
And then applications.
if I'm pregnant.
Yeah.
What's next? So yeah, so where do you find these opportunities? So if you want ArtsWA opportunities, definitely sign up for our newsletter. You can do so on our website. Follow our social media. We always post when we have an open call. We'll be posting when we have, when the public artist roster application opens. There are also lots of listservs. So the Public Art Network is through Americans for the Arts, and you can sign up. A lot of people share when they have opportunities available. There's another website called Public Art Exchange that you can join that will post opportunities. And also just be mindful, you shouldn't have to submit application fees to apply to these things. If you see that, it's a red flag. Let's see what else. So like if you are in Spokane, I would get on the Spokane Arts website right away and see if they have anything you can sign up for and follow them, because they're gonna have a lot of those local opportunities that are really good for getting your foot in the door, but also look for our application that's going to be opening in May. And so most applications will ask for images of past work. And this is why, if you've never done a public art commission before, doing some of the smaller temporary projects can be really great, because it demonstrates how your work will translate to larger scale. That said, if you don't have any examples, you can still submit your studio work. And we also ask for a resume or personal statement. So for us, that's an about you statement. We encourage people to talk about how they want to translate their work for public spaces in that statement. That is something that committees look at. If it's an open call, you might have a letter of interest where they ask you to specify your interest in that specific opportunity. And then sometimes they ask for references. We don't ask for references for the public artist roster, but sometimes we do for open calls. It just depends.
So another thing that's kind of drawn from right in, I don't think it's right. Every plan year will
So
start.
what's happening on the other end? So once you send your beautiful portfolio out into the ether, like what happens to it, right? So there's usually a formal committee that's been selected for this role, and they meet with the project manager, like in our process, right? And they establish goals. They kind of start the brainstorming about possible locations and possible ideas they want to convey. And then this kind of dedicated group of individuals will then kind of review the submissions, or will review the public artist roster to select the artists that they would like to work with. I feel like that was very brief. Do you have anything you would like to add?
Well, just that the committees, when we're actually selecting for projects, we're looking at very specific parameters. So they'll have already discussed, like let's say we were doing public art for this room, we'd be like, well, we have some opportunities on the walls. There's really no space for sculpture. And maybe, let's say it's a convention center. So let's say maybe we want artwork that represents Spokane or something like that. So when they're looking at the portfolios, that's the lens they're using. So I hear from artists a lot who get really discouraged because they don't get picked for projects, and like 90% of the time, it has nothing to do with absolute artwork, but more about what the criteria is, what they're looking for. Whenever we have these reviews, the committees struggle because they love everything. And so it's really just like, okay, so you love everything, but you love that sculpture, but is it the right artist or artwork for this room? So when you're applying to like the public artist roster, which is really general, you don't know who's looking at it, you kind of want to show your range and your interests. Because ideally, the best commissions happen when the interest, your personal interests align with what the committee is looking for concepts. So, so show your range, show what you're interested in, and then it's kind of like matchmaking. And if you're applying for a specific opportunity, really think about, they will list what their criteria is. So make sure that you address it. It's very similar to like a job application.
There are other states that, have a lower
Sure. So again, kind of dovetailing on that, like similarly to a job application with some public calls and things like that, they may want to interview the finalists, like get to know them on a kind of a more personal level, right? So once they go through this interview process, then they will invite finalists to create a proposal. This is where kind of the rubber starts to hit the road, right? And so then they'll present their ideas in kind of this collaborative process, and the committee will pick kind of the final design to move forward. So for ArtsWA, we don't typically work this way. We usually work with the public artist roster. So we wouldn't necessarily be creating proposals for every single call immediately.
So if you do apply for the public artist roster and you get on, most of the time you're just going to get a call from a project manager if you've been chosen, and you'll have the project, and that'll be the end of it. You won't have to interview, and then once you're selected, then you will create a proposal and you'll have a contract for that. There are a lot of agencies do work differently where they will ask for a proposal before you're selected. So it's just a way to keep that in mind.
Kind of a great benefit of doing it this way is that our artists get paid for the labor that they're doing in creating these proposals. It's very important. We want to pay artists, right? So you got that call, right? Your project manager calls you and lets you know you've got the project. So then now what do you do, right? What happens next? We are a state bureaucracy, right? There is paperwork, right? So you have to apply for a statewide vendor license, and UBI, there are contracts, right? It's that all of this can be very intimidating, and that's part of why we have folks like us who are, you know, deep in the system, so to speak, to help walk folks through it, right? Make sure that all of the T's are crossed and I's are dotted. You're a project manager. Us, and some of our colleagues. So our colleague, Day, who actually has just moved into a similar role for the city of Seattle. We'll miss her. But yeah, we've got your back. We're here to support artists and to facilitate this whole process. We'll guide you through all that paperwork, keep you connected with the site and the committee, and help keep things on track, right? And so if there's a problem that comes up either in the proposal phase or in fabrication, like you run into a problem, your project manager is your go-to fixer, right? We've been through a lot of stuff, we have lots of answers, right? And if we don't have the answers, we know who to talk to find them.
Committees. So if you've never done public art before, this can be difficult because it's not only about your own artistic vision, but it's about like a collective community vision. So committee work is very important, being able to listen to what they hope for the artwork, being able to ask them questions. Sometimes they might tell you they want something, and you know they're not artists. So you as the artist are sort of the expert to sort of kind of distill what it is that they want to portray. So sometimes there's good input, sometimes there's bad input. What we've noticed is a lot of artists who are working for committees first time, they want to please everyone. And so It's what we call the kitchen sink. So we do develop kitchen sink lists because we think it's really helpful as a brainstorming activity for the committee to get as much out on paper as they can. But the expectation is that the artist might grab one thing out of the sink and really run with it. So the most successful public art is when you stay true to your artistic vision while still listening to what your committee is looking for and knowing how to ask the right questions.
And hopefully by having reviewed the range that you presented in your portfolio, then it's already kind of set up for success. Like they're already intrigued and interested and loving your vision, and they want to help expand upon it. So in the proposal phase with our program, then once the artist is selected, the next thing that after some paperwork and initial contracts are handled, then the next part is the site visit. So this is where the artist will actually go to the location with the committee, and it's kind of an awesome conversation. They get a sense of the space, and you have this great kind of dialogue. It's this really cool collaborative process. So then the artists will go back to their studio and kind of start that design process. And then next, come back together for initial design meeting, where you present, here's my starting point, right? And collect feedback from the committee, right? And so then once kind of an initial design is sort of approved, and then the artist will go off to kind of refine it a bit more. And depending on how, the type of the project, how in-depth it is, there might be kind of some check-in meetings in there, particularly with, the project managers, not necessarily the entire committee every time. And then there will be kind of that final design presentation, right? And typically, the committee can give some feedback in the final design presentation, but usually this is kind of a thumbs up or thumbs down sort of event, right? Because they already, once you got through the initial design process, they already kind of have, they kind of know what to expect, right? So unless something just radically changed between those two meetings, typically everybody's on board and excited to kind of get that last jumping off point.
So timeline can vary depending on which agency you're working with. So if you're working with the city, sometimes you'll be aligning with the construction schedule and you'll have really strict deadlines to follow. With ArtsWA, our funding actually we don't receive it until construction has already started. So we're almost always installing after a building is done. And this process takes time, right? You're an artist, oftentimes it's just one person. It's not like a construction company with a ton of people working. So we usually allow about 8 to 12 months for design. And then it takes a little bit of time to get your design documents stamped by an engineer and for us to get contracts going. And so the fabrication portion can take up to a year. So our projects typically take 2 to 3 years from start to finish. So be prepared for that. That's not only to give you time to do what you need to do, but also to give our bureaucracy time to do the reviews and due diligence of reviewing materials and reviewing safety and all of those things.
So budgets are always, a hot topic, right? So we, of course, want the artist to kind of define how they use that budget, right? We don't do like a line-by-line audit, like did you use this X amount on that you put on your budget for paint or not, right? There's a little bit of wiggle room there. So as we mentioned at the beginning, the budget is kind of determined by the 0.5% of the total building budget, right? So if you're, say, getting a new school building or something like that, a new building on the university campus, that might be like a $5 million project. So 1% of that total budget will be set aside for artwork, right? So then once that budget is established, it's kind of up to the artist how they want to use it, right? So that budget has to include not only the artist fee and the artist labor, or any assistance that they might hire, but also the materials and the fabrication, the transportation and installation, and a variety of other things that you don't always think of immediately when you're talking about the cost of artwork. So if you needed to rent a studio space, like if you didn't have a space to create work of that scale, for example, or insurance, tax, etc., right? And if you've ever done any large scale project, one of the most important things to have is your contingency budget, right? This is kind of a 10 to 15% that you set aside just in case something goes wrong. Like you need to replace a material, something gets broken in transit, X, Y, and Z, right? If none of that happens, then the contingency kind of goes back to the artist fee, right? But it's very important to set that aside and have that available.
And just to give you an idea, if you are going to work with ArtsWA, our budgets right now start at $35,000. And so that, for people who maybe only done murals, that can seem like a lot of money. But when you actually break it down for the insurance, the studio overhead, all of those things, that it goes. It's like a mini construction project. And I already saw the next slide. So if this all sounds intimidating, don't worry, because you have experienced project managers here who have your back. So when I asked to review a budget, I'm not doing like what Rebecca said we don't do. I'm not looking to audit to see if you've put everything in it like hardware and to make sure you actually spend what you say you're going to spend, but I'm looking to make sure that you are paying yourself enough money, that you have enough room in your contingency for the unexpected, and that there's no like major line item missing that you haven't anticipated. And so we review that, because that's our job as risk managers, is to make sure that your project is feasible and that it won't go over budget for your own sake.
So as we mentioned, like ArtsWA, we don't fund temporary projects. So the idea is we want to have that longevity piece. So durability is ultimately a huge part of this, right? So we have a formal material and fabrication handbook that helps as a resource for artists. So if they have questions about process and materials, that resource is there, right? In addition to your problem solving project manager, right? And so we have, of course, there are different considerations for indoor works versus outdoor. You have weather, etc., and even the ways that the public might interact with it. So graffiti is a thing, right? I've had pieces like I'm also a public artist, as you saw. I've had pieces of sculpture where there were like long kind of extending bits that tended to break off and go missing. And have to recast and reattach them periodically. Or even there's a really great example of pieces that get in the way, right? They create a nuisance like unexpectedly and make people angry. If you piss off your community, that's going to be bad for the longevity of your artwork, right? So to support this with the artists, then we also work with conservators and engineers to make sure that the piece will be able to stand up to the elements, to the conditions that it's going to be subjected to, and also engineers to make sure it's safe and structurally sound. And again, as we've been saying, like if you don't have a lot of experience with fabrication, or you don't necessarily have the facilities to do it yourself, you can hire somebody who does, right? And that's part of why these budgets sound huge, is because we want you to be able to have those resources.
And the Materials and Fabrication Handbook is actually online. So if you go to arts.wa.gov, under Public Art, there's acquisitions, there's a resource section for artists. So you can actually download and read the Materials and Fabrication Handbook, which gives really good information about like what's acceptable outdoors versus indoors. And it's just a good tool for artists in general to take a look at. And yeah, so we're looking for artworks that are gonna last for 30 plus years. Because we're a state program, we're centrally based in Olympia. We have one conservation tech out here east now. So we're really looking for things that can be maintained long term. And we're also thinking about how the artwork is gonna age over time. So we wanna make sure that the artwork can look the way the artist intended it to for as long as possible, because there gets to a point where artworks can deteriorate, where they're not maintained, where they no longer represent the artist well. And in that case, we might be looking at a D a session. So the idea is to keep these looking great as long as possible, and that's why we work with conservators proactively to make sure that the right decisions are made to ensure that.
Now, voluntary plan employers, they are still.
So once you have made your incredible, beautiful piece, the next step is installation, right? And so since this is a state construction project, there's, again, bureaucracy, right? So lots of paperwork, right? So if you are working with installers, then for public works projects, you need to pay them prevailing wages. Like, it's state law, you have to pay fairly, right? We want everyone to be paid for their work, right? You also need to be a licensed contractor if you are yourself modifying any state structure, right? And this is down to even putting a screw in drywall, right? I recently had an installation where I was working with an artist on installing in a public school, right? Which the school district supplied, a carpenter and some staff to help with that, so that burden wouldn't be entirely on the artist. And so as we were kind of coordinating that, then the artist was like, "Oh yeah, I'll bring an extra drill, and I've got all this hardware. We'll get it done." And I had to be like, "So we didn't want you to have to pay to get all these licenses, so we're going to let our friends at the school district handle that," right? So there are ways that you can work with the facilities, and it's great when the facilities can supply that support, right? So again, that engineering piece is really important. Okay? And for a lot of outdoor works and large-scale works, you need to have permits too. Was there anything you'd like to add?
I think I suspect what the next slide is, but just a reminder that the project manager is here to guide you through this again, because it is super, yeah. We will walk you through what we anticipate your requirements will be. We have contacts with labor and industries who understand working with artists. We really walk you through it step by step, and there's also, like for permits and things like that, it varies city by city. So we work really closely with the architects and construction companies to help usher that through. And we are the master of workarounds, like Rebecca said. If the artist, all they needed to do was put a hole in a wall to have to register as a general contractor, that just doesn't make sense. So we have workarounds for you. So don't be intimidated, because you'll have help. You will not be on your own.
I cannot pronounce Oregon rolled out their program.
So again, back to that who installs, right? So again, this is kind of worked out in your contract, right? So this is all really clearly defined, right? Which helps the artist, it helps everybody understand whose role is what, right? And we do have lots of professional art installers here in the state of Washington, folks that you can work with. And ideally, so they would have site contracts for trade work, right? And they should be familiar with all of this as well, right? Especially if they've worked with ArtsWA before, they've had to deal with the bureaucracy, right? So you'd like to add on this one.
The total premium rate this year is 0.7.
Yeah, so like Rebecca said, these projects you have a team, you're building your own team. So if you've never installed scaffolding before, gotten up on a lift, you can hire an installer. A lot of fabricators also install. So that goes the same like with installation. For ArtsWA, we will try to work with the site to see if their maintenance staff can help, right? Because not only is that going to streamline things for the artist, but then it also gives the site a sense of ownership of the art. They understand how it's put together, they'll take better care of it. But not all can. So with our projects, you sort of have to be prepared to do it on your own, but we will try to get help for you wherever we can.
This changes.
Or the Picasso.
Oh yeah, okay, fine. So this is a funny story. So Western State Hospital, they have a new ward, it's for a forensic ward, and the construction contractor installed for the artist, basically. And so when we went there to see the installation, to inspect it, he was like, "Oh, I thought art was really dumb," until these came arrive. He's like, "I thought art was just like Picasso, it's so dumb." And I'm like, But then he's like, this is so cool, and he really loved it. And he even signed the back of it with his name because he wanted his mark on it. But they were beautiful landscape mosaics of Olympic National Park. So he's like, I didn't know artwork could be this cool. So that's what we're aiming for. And again, it's like the public art should be accessible. So if you're from the community, you're going to be able to represent the community best, and that's why having veteran artists create artwork for veteran facilities is so important.
So then, last steps with the installation. So you put the artwork in place, magnificent. Now we also want to have an identification plaque, right? We want there to be, if the artist statement is really important to understanding the work, you want that to be where folks can see it and access it, right? So that identification plaque, you will always see an identification plaque somewhere around our beautiful collection pieces, right? And then after the installation is complete and you've got your beautiful plaque installed, then there's still more paperwork. We love bureaucracy, right? So you have the detailed artwork report. And part of why this is important is, again, part of that longevity piece. So you're telling future conservators, future conservation specialists what you did, how you made it, what it's made out of. So again, they can maintain your vision as truly to it as possible over its lifetime. Right? And so then also just, making a report of what you paid folks, right? So that you're in line with your contract. And then, of course, we want to document the process, right? So you'll have photographs of the work when it was in process, right? And photographs of how it was installed, right? So that way, if it needs to be taken down for maintenance or it needs to be recited, then there's a record of what they can expect, right? And then party time, right? Then you're done, yay, right? Which we often will be, there will be a dedication. I think it's the next one. Oh,
Just wanted to check.
I missed the dedication. But can you talk briefly about the dedications?
Yeah. Well, real quick, I'm realizing with this example, it's a good example of an artist, how she worked with a fabricator. So Jun Sekaguchi, in her studio practice, works with a lot of paper. She'll do paper cuts, these long, beautiful, sprawling installations. And so she ended up working with a fabricator who cut her patterns, like she did the design, they cut her patterns into this acrylic material, assembled them, and also installed for her. And so, I think her budget was $65,000, which seemed like a lot to her at that time, but then she realized, okay, I'm gonna hire a fabricator, so I have to pay this fabricator, they have to pay their staff, there's taxes, it's like, it goes. But then, for her celebration, we had a party in the library, we had students come, this was for a middle school, and the other piece is the photograph piece. So if you're new to public art and you're going to be applying to opportunities, the photographs are really important. So we do set aside money to hire a professional photographer, and we'll share those with you. But if you're doing work for an agency that doesn't do that, I strongly recommend trying to hire a professional photographer. The difference is huge, even if you can work that into your budget with them, because I'm sure they would like those photographs as well. And that really helps your portfolio for when you're applying for opportunities in the future.
Thank you very, very much. That's kind of our spiel. We wanted to make sure that we open it up for any questions you might have. Yeah.
How many projects do you have currently going?
Our whole program, we have more than 100 open right now, I believe. I personally, I think I have 17 right now. 17 that we're working on. Marissa, I think you maybe have more.
No comments.
I'm kind of new, right? I joined ArtsWA just last February, and I'm the first project manager, kind of based here in Eastern Washington. I'm based in Kennewick right now. Most of my projects are in Central and Eastern Washington.
And I'll just say, if you apply for the roster, we use it for most of our projects. So I think through the term of a roster, you may be shown like up to 100 times. We don't necessarily tell you every time you're getting shown, but we probably select almost 60 projects because there's 5 project managers and we're ideally carrying about 20 projects, but so yeah, it's roughly about 100 at a time, but that's over a 2 to 3 year period. So it's a good application to apply for because you're actually applying for a lot of projects. Any other questions?
I think you got it.
Who pays for the picturist artwork to mosaic? Who pays for it? You guys do?
So if you're translating an
Yeah.
artwork, so again, it kind of depends on the agency. So a lot of agencies, they might work directly with a mosaic person and they're just paying you for the art. If you were to have a project with us, we would, you would you'd have a contract to design it, and that might be like a rough painting. And then we might help connect you to a fabricator. We might give you a list of fabricators that we know of. We can't really recommend anyone, but you would find the fabricator and work with them. And so then the fabricator essentially becomes your subcontractor. So you're given the budget, the big project, then you have a contract with them and you're paying them through your contract with us. That's typically how we work, but some agencies work a little differently.
Because we have a nonprofit started by a veterans organization in Seattle, our
Okay.
Laubscher County called Pacific Northwest Vets,
Okay.
and they have some veteran artists. That's what it's
See, that's
so
really,
I'll connect.
It's good to know.
that's kind of awesome to know because yeah, that seems like one of those partnerships where we could work something out maybe where maybe we would consider, hiring a fabricator to translate a batch of artworks. And I know Sound Transit in Seattle, they're one of the agencies that they fabricate directly with, it's not just mosaic, it's, what's it called? It's like a ceramic firing process where like it's cast on metal and ceramic frit, so it looks like a mural, but it lasts forever. It's like what they use in national parks. So they, Windsor Fire Forum, they have a direct relationship where they'll work with artists, translate it, and then they produce it to their specs because they have stations that are like very configured and consistent. So we haven't done that yet, but it's something we're considering. And Mighty Tieton, and Tieton, there's a great mosaic fabricator here in Washington. So there's a lot. And you had a question.
And my question is, well, somewhat related. I'm just curious, are you both artists? Is that, and then into this role, or is that your background? And I'm sorry, you may have said that. I was a little bit coming on.
Rebecca will have more to say about this than I, but yeah, my background was in studio art. I make art less now, but that might change, but Rebecca has a robust practice.
Robust. Yeah, I'm a public artist and a studio artist, so I both applying for commissions and exhibitions, and art fairs and things like that, where I might have opportunities to connect with folks and sell work. So that's kind of my side hustle. But and I also I have a master's of fine art. My original career plan was to go into education. So that's what I was doing prior to ArtsWA. But this has been a really great opportunity, and I still get to work within these educational facilities, right?
I would say, like I said, I would say it's like that.
Sorry.
Does the artist still own the work?
That is a very good question. So the artwork itself, the physical object, is owned by the state of Washington, but the artist retains copyright. So you own the rights to the artwork, but the object itself is owned by us. Does that answer the question?
I guess partly like, let's say you install in a public library and then that library is later destroyed. Where does that art go?
That is an excellent question. So we have a whole separate arm in our programs that falls under collections, and we have an art care